Welcome everyone to today's session on the state of governance well-being. Today we have with us Shona McGlashan. Shona leads the McGlashan Consulting, where she helps to organize, strengthen governance, advance inclusion, and build healthier workplaces. Shauna is a fellow of the Chartered Governance Institute of Canada, and she has been working in governance and she's been a governance professional for many years. And she's known to bring clarity, candor, and humanity and humility to complex leadership challenges. Shauna's governance career includes a decade in executive roles within the credit union and co-op sector, most recently as VP Governance and Corporate Secretary at Vancity and Chief Governance Officer at MEC. She blends deep expertise with a people first approach that makes good governance both practical and powerful. Today's session, we will be looking at governance and well being. And from what we have seen through the registration, so many of you are here to learn so much more about governance. And I believe that Shona has the right amount of expertise and knowledge to be able to speak on this. Um, Nearly half of board directors in the UK report that they've experienced poor mental health due to job stress, heavy workloads, and poor work-life balance. So while we don't yet have comparable statistics for Canadian directors, our governance our governance professionals, it's clear we're navigating a broader mental health crisis. So this session today would explore the specific challenges governance professionals face, how they can be addressed, and the role boards can play in fostering healthy, flourishing workplace culture. So we're very excited about the session, and I will be handing it over to Shona to get us started today.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Hi, everybody. I'm Shona McGlashan. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm really excited to be here to spend the next hour talking about governance and well-being. And an update on my introduction, because Kimberly spoke about the statistics that we had on UK directors and how board work was affecting their mental health. Now, we didn't have any comparable statistics for Canada, but now we do, because over the course of this spring, I launched with the first the 2026 Canada Pulse Check results, the Pulse Check survey of both governance professionals and of board directors. So we now do have some data. And so, how are we doing? Well, the answer is complicated, and we're going to get into that in the next hour. So we've got about an hour together. We're going to spend about 20 minutes, maybe talking about the data. What did the survey show? What have we found out? What have we learned? We'll spend maybe about another 20 minutes on what it brings up. We've got a good group here of about 50 people, so we'll be turning it over to you, like what resonates, what surprises you, and then the final 20 minutes will be getting practical on what you can do next, right? What individual governance professionals can do, and maybe what we as a profession should be thinking about in terms of supporting the well-being of the people in the profession. So I want to start, of course, by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people here in Vancouver, BC. It's a very beautiful day today. I can already hear the car horns honking as everybody gets ready for the Canada match in a couple of hours. Very grateful to be here. You can tell, of course, as soon as I start speaking, that I am an immigrant here on this land. Which is great news for me because I get to support Canada and Scotland in the World Cup. And very happy to be here, to be living and working and raising my family in this very beautiful place. So let's start with just some ground rules for the session. So first of all, I can't see any of you. So if you can switch on your cameras, that would be great, but don't worry about it if you can't. I because I think the setup is just to show me, which is extremely distracting, obviously. But so I would love this to be an interactive session, and I'm going to pose some questions to you as we go. So if you do have questions, comments as we go, you can either drop them in the chat But what I would prefer would be if you come off mute and just say, hey, Shona, right? Because I've got a lot of screens and lots of tiny things going on. So if you drop something in the chat, I won't necessarily see it straight away. So it's easier for me anytime. Don't worry about interrupting my flow. Just come off mute and say, hey, Shona. And I just want to confirm with Kimberly that participants are able to do that. Yep. Are they going to be able to come off mute and speak?
So because it's set up through a webinar session, and this is something I
Yep.
should have told you before,
Oh,
you
okay. They're
may
not going to be
not
able to
be
do that.
able to do that
Okay.
because of the
What?
setup of the session.
Okay. In that case, what I'm going to say is put
They'll
something in the
be
chat.
able to put yes
Yeah.
questions in the chat.
And if you would be able to, I'll try and keep an eye on the chat, but if something's coming up in the chat
I will be
that
sure
I
to share
don't
it
see,
with
if
you.
you could let me know.
Yes.
And yeah, so I wonder if later on there's some questions for the group. I don't know if you're going to be able to turn on this speech for that. If we can do it, that would be great. And if not, we'll figure it out. Um, so so just my usual setup for webinars is, you make yourselves comfortable. Like this hour is your hour. So if you need to stand up, stretch, walk around, get a glass of water, whatever, do all those things. Um, you know, do what you need to be engaged and present for the session. And I want to remind you all, there's wisdom in this room, right? So we have got over 50 governance professionals and direct board directors here, probably primarily governance professionals. And you will have experienced between us, decades, centuries, I hesitate millennia, but certainly centuries of work in governance, working with boards, serving on boards, reporting to boards. So in this room, there's a kind of a vast amount of expertise, and I would love for us to be able to tap into that if we are able to do so. Okay, so any questions before we kick off? Type fast. And if not, I'm going to crack onto the data. All right. So what is the picture? So as I say, I launched Canada's first governance and wellbeing survey this spring, right? And what the data shows is not a crisis, right? Governance work matters to the people who are doing it, and that shows up in the data. And it's not a crisis for our mental health, but there are some interesting things that I think we need to all be aware of. So first of all, it's the first national survey in Canada. As far as I know, it is the first worldwide survey of governance professionals. I haven't been able to find another one. So if anybody knows of another one that's happened in another jurisdiction, please let me know because I would love to be able to compare the data. So we surveyed two groups separately. We got responses from 73 governance professionals and 68 board directors. So it was almost half and half. And the questions covered well-being, stressors, the meaning people got from governance work, and the structural conditions and supports that existed in each role. So if you were somebody that contributed to the survey, thank you so much. Your data and your candor helped this work to be done. Right, so now it's the first time that we have data on this. And I want to give a big shout out as well to my research partners, Governance Professionals of Canada and Women Get on Board, who helped amplify the survey among their membership and make sure that we got as good a reach as we could. And my hope is that this is the kind of survey, this is a pulse check survey, and my hope is that we're going to run it on an ongoing basis, maybe annual basis, so that we can see what is changing in the profession. So I would love for you to participate next year. So I can talk about how we can do that later on. Okay, so what did we find out? Well, here you go. The same governance system, different experiences, which is not necessarily a surprise, right? So, of the governance professionals have higher average life satisfaction than Canadians. So, this is the question where we ask people on a scale of 0 to 10, how satisfied are you with your life right now? The Canadian average is 6.7, which puts Canada in about the top 15 nations worldwide. The Scandinavian countries are the highest. As you would imagine, countries that have very poor infrastructure or war zones and whatever are the lowest. Life satisfaction in Canada has fallen. It's fallen over the past 5 years. It's fallen fastest in young people, millennials and Gen Z. But it's still relatively high at 6.7. Governance professionals are higher than that, a little bit higher than that, 6.95. Board directors, however, are really significantly higher than that, 7.79 out of 10. So board directors are a whole, 10 points ahead in terms of their general life satisfaction, right? And both groups find meaning in governance work. 81% of governance professionals find meaning or purpose. 96% of board directors find meaning or purpose. And this is really interesting because as human beings, in order to experience life satisfaction, we really need to experience two different sorts of happiness. The first one, the one we sort of instinctively think of, is what we'd call hedonic happiness. Hedonic happiness is pleasure in the moment. It's a lovely meal with your friends. It's playing with your kids or your dog. It's looking at a nice sunset. It's watching a TV show or reading a book that you enjoy. So it's dancing, right? So hedonic happiness is it's fleeting, right? But it's also important. And as human beings, we need to have those moments of joy, right? And as Brené Brown tells us, joy banked over time fuels resilience. So we do need hedonic happiness, but we also, and this speaks to the meaning on purpose piece, we also need to experience something called eudaimonic happiness, which is the sense of well-being that you get from being part of something bigger than yourself, from purpose, from living your values, from being part of a team that is doing something important, from connection in your workplace, in your communities, in your families, right? So this idea of feeling meaning and purpose in your governance work is really important because that is the basis for eudaimonic happiness, which increases people's life satisfaction. So here you go. About 8 in 10 of governance professionals are finding meaning. Almost all board directors are finding meaning. This is good news, right? But governance professionals are carrying a heavy load, right? Because more than a third of governance professionals say the work that they do is actively hurting their overall well-being. 36% say the work is negatively impacting their overall well-being, whereas 90% of board directors say that the work has a positive effect on their well-being. So these are people who are existing in the same system, who are working together, and they're having quite different experiences of what it feels like to be in that governance system. Super interesting. So let's talk about our governance professionals. What are they experiencing? These are the top stressors that we're seeing among governance professionals. More than half, nearly 6 out of 10, feel under-resourced. That means that the majority of governance professionals are experiencing this. They're under-resourced for the work they do, right? More than half of them are finding the unpredictable workload and the urgent demands of the work stressful. And, for governance professionals on the call, I would love to know how much this resonates because my experience is, when the board wants something, the board gets something. And so the workload is unpredictable. And also, of course, when there's a crisis in an organization, the board gets pulled in. So whenever there are crises, and we're living in a world of, almost perma-crisis, whenever there are crises, the board gets pulled in and the governance professional has to support that, right? So depending on your industry and your sector and what's going on, you may feel that you're just kind of bouncing from crisis to crisis in your governance role. Okay, almost half of governance professionals are experiencing difficulty setting limits. So everything's urgent, meetings are happening in evenings, weekends, your time is being eroded, and it's very hard to say, actually, no, I can't do that, or no, my team cannot do that, or that's going to take longer than you think, or if this is a priority, what priority are you taking off? So almost half of us are finding difficulty setting limits on the work. And here you go. I mean, again, 37%, nearly 4 in 10, find they have insufficient authority to realize their accountabilities. And governance professionals often carry really like board level accountability at the very highest level without having board level authority. Because often for governance professionals, they don't have actual formal reporting and authority structures. They do their work by persuasion and influence. And sometimes that's not enough to achieve their goals. So I think what this tells me is that the governance system, it asks a lot of governance professionals and it supports a little bit, but not as much as it could. So that's my thinking on this. Here's some more things that we know about governance professionals, right? We said this 44% have difficulty setting limits on their workload. Almost half of them say their organization does not address stress and burnout. And nearly a third of us experiencing conflicting demands from the board chair and the CEO. So squeezed from both sides. And quite commonly, as you know, governance professionals will have a dotted line reporting relationship to the CEO and a solid line to the board chair, or vice versa. So, and sometimes that can cause a lot of conflict and strain, and obviously sometimes invisible conflict and strain. But here's good: 64% can always or often manage the emotional demands of the role. That's a sign that governance professionals are resilient and most of them are holding it together. But I would say holding it together is not the same as being systemically supported by your organization, supported by your by the system of governance. So again, the structural numbers about the authority gap that governance professionals experience, about burnout not being addressed at an organizational level, about it being hard to set limits, those point to me, systemic issues. Systemic issues in the workplace for sure, and systemic issues within the governance profession, rather than individual issues of people just not being able to cope. So, any questions about the numbers from the governance professionals? I'm going to carry on, but if you've got questions, please just type them in. So let's turn to board directors, a slightly different picture. So board directors are doing well by most measures. And remember, 90% of them say their board work reports a positive impact on their well-being. And 96% of them find meaning. And this isn't surprising, really, I think, because board directors, the survey didn't break out, who's working for not-for-profits, who's working for crowns, who's working for privates or cooperatives, who's working for publicly listed companies. But I imagine, and maybe this is something we'll dive into next year's survey, I imagine that some of the directors that responded were, well, I know that some of the directors that responded, I just don't know how many, were board directors on not-for-profits or what we now call social enterprise or social profit organizations. And those can be very purpose-driven, mission-driven. So to give you an example from my own life, I'm the board chair at Pain BC, which incorporates Pain Canada, which is the world's largest not-for-profit that supports and advocates for people living with chronic pain. And I'm also the vice chair and the governance committee chair at Bard on the Beach, which is Canada's kind of preeminent Shakespeare festival. And those two roles bring a lot of meaning and purpose to my life because they are organizations that I support wholeheartedly. I find a lot of meaning in contributing to their mission. And I expect that a lot of board directors feel the same way. And we know a lot of board directors feel the same way now because 96% of them report that they find meaning. But here you go. 88% of them are serving in organizations that are in a state of change, uncertainty, or crisis. And where does that stress land? Well, it's in the executive and at the board table. And I mean, it's throughout the whole organization. And we know that, I saw a statistic that in BC, something like maybe 1 in 3 not-for-profits is not convinced of its financial sustainability beyond 12 months. That's a lot of stress showing up in the leadership rooms that have to make existential decisions about how their organizations are working. And if you work in not-for-profit or you're on a board for not-for-profit, you'll know that it's really tough out there right now. Funding is really tough, right? Government funding is really tough. Donors are having a harder time. Like the economy is not at its healthiest. So things are really tough across all sectors, not just not-for-profits. And so here you go. Nearly 9 in 10 of board directors are serving organizations in a state of change, uncertainty, or crisis, which causes it stress. And again, nearly the same number, nearly 9 in 10 say their organizations do not talk about stress and burnout in directors. So here's the top stresses that they're reporting. Nearly half of them say that the time demands or workload are stressful. Just over a third, liability and accountability concerns. Just under a third, emotional load of high stakes decisions. And I think back to the pandemic when my the theatre company that I'm on the board of had to make a decision about whether to go ahead and try and run a theatre season in 2020 and 2021. Obviously, with hindsight, there was no theatre going to happen during the pandemic, but we didn't know that then, right? And about a quarter of them are finding the crisis-driven pace of board work stressful, right? So here we know that generally board directors are thriving and their board work is meaningful and impactful to them, which is great news. And if any of you have ever worked with me in a governance context, you'll probably heard me say something along the lines of, we have our one wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver, the poet, tells us. But if you're spending time serving on a board, you're giving to the organization and you ought to be getting something back as well. Now, that might be compensation if you're on a corporate board, and it might be prestige and something on your resume, but it should be deeper than that as well. It should be meaning and purpose and community and learning and development, right? And so it does seem like that is landing. But there are stresses in the role that we are not yet talking about, right? We're not yet talking about them. So this is really interesting to me as well. Any questions about what we've seen from the board directors?
We do have two questions
Great, thank
in
you.
the
What are they? Let me
Q&A.
have a look. Oh, they're not coming up in the chat for me. Oh, I see. There's a Q&A. Let's have a
Q&A,
good.
yes.
Yep. So Rod asked, is there a difference between not-for-profit and for-profit organizations? I don't know, Rod, because this was a pulse check. It's a really short 12-question survey. And so we don't have the longitudinal data that breaks down by sector. That's certainly something that was in my head as we set the survey up, but I knew that I wanted it to be a quick survey. But next year, I think that may be a really interesting issue to dig into for sure. Um, yeah. And how many respondents in each category again? Any estimate of total numbers in Canada? So we had 140 altogether, and it was almost just over 140. It was almost half governance professionals and board directors. So yes, in terms of how many board directors there are in Canada, thousands. In terms of governance professionals, a smaller number. So yes, it's a pulse check. Is it, it's the information we have. We haven't yet reached everybody in the profession or everybody in the organization, everybody in who's a director. I would love to work with other organizations next year to extend the reach even more. So please do. I'll talk later about how you can sign up for updates about this work, and please do. When the next survey comes out, I would love it if people could promote it among their networks, because the bigger numbers we get, the clearer picture we get, and the more information we get. It says 5 questions were answered, but I don't know that. Okay, yeah, I think we've answered all the material questions. The other ones were technical issues. But please do keep bringing questions forward. So what I want to move into is um, is finding out what the survey data brings up for you. Now, I was hoping we could have an open, let's take everybody on mute and people can speak up and ask questions, but that doesn't seem to be technically feasible. So I want to ask Kimberly, are we able to put people in breakout groups? Maybe breakout groups, there's around 60 people. Are we able to put people in breakout groups so they can have a conversation through this?
I do not think technically with the webinar setup, it would
Mm-hmm.
allow us to do that. So
Okay, that's too bad. All right. Well, what we're going to have to do is I'm going to have to talk, and hopefully people are going to respond by typing something. Um, so the first thing I want to ask is, this is a group primarily of governance professionals. Where do you see yourself in the data? I'd love it if people could pop in the chat. What surprised you? Or was there anything that didn't surprise you at all? So I'm going to leave a minute for people to type. Apologies that this is a little suboptimal, but what did you, and can people use the chat, Kimberly, or is it only the Q&A function that's available to them?
that would be the Q&A function. So they'll type their
Okay,
question in the, yeah.
yeah, so it doesn't need to be a question. So,
Or
uh,
yes, their view is
yeah,
yes.
so are people able to put in what surprised them and what didn't surprise them at all? I'll give a couple of minutes. Hopefully people are able to type in. And if not, you're just going to have to hear my reflections. Okay, I've got two more questions, so I'm going to put them up as well. So if that question doesn't resonate with you, I would like to hear your responses to the next question, which is, where are you? You know, are you thriving? Are you running on fumes? Are you somewhere in between? Does it depend on the week or the month? And this idea that there's a gap between the authority that governance professionals have and the accountabilities that they hold, does that resonate? And what does it feel like? So we'd love to hear some insights. We have got 62 people in the room here, other than Brittany and myself, Kimberly and myself. So if people are able to
We
contribute, that would
have
certainly be fantastic.
we have five
We do? Okay, fantastic.
answers so far, yes.
Right. Yeah. So here's somebody not surprised that directors found more fulfillment than governance professionals. And I guess that does make sense because governance professionals are, it's their job. Um, and our jobs ought to be really, when you think about the kind of things that give people fulfillment, they give us money, they give us status, they give us connection, they give us purpose. Jobs ought to be great for our mental health, but in practice, jobs can also be the biggest stressors in people's lives, right? Here's somebody who's not surprised that people feel like they're stretched thin. Yeah, I mean, 2026 is a tough time to be a human being for just about all of us, I would say. And I think, one of the things about the role of being a governance professional does mean that you're kind of does lend itself to this idea of being stretched thin, of the demands being constant and unpredictable. Um, Yep. So yeah, here's somebody saying no surprises in the data. Here's somebody saying, do I have any insight on in how the load has changed for governance professionals in the past 5 years? And this person sees a lot more burnout on their team. Well, I don't have any insight on this because this is the first pulse check, but I can tell you what's happening more generally in Canada in the workplace, which is that 67% of Canadian professionals report feeling burnt out in 2026, right? Two-thirds of us are feeling burned out. And that is up from, I think, 47%. I'd have to check that number, but that's up from 47% a couple of years ago. So burnout is getting worse among professionals. It's kind of an epidemic, and I can't imagine that governance professionals are any different. And just to take a step back and tell you about burnout. So burnout classically has three main kind of symptoms. The first one, as you'd imagine, is exhaustion. You're burnt out, you're exhausted. The second one is cynicism or negativity, right? Which is really, cynicism is you're not just tired, but you're also feeling cynical and negative. And the third one is reduced work performance. So two-thirds of Canadian professionals are experiencing exhaustion, cynicism, and reduced work performance. So has it gotten worse for governance professionals in the last 5 years? I can't say for sure based on the data I have, but I can say it has absolutely gotten worse for Canadian professionals in the last 5 years. And I can't see why governance professionals would be any different. Um, so, so yeah, and here's somebody saying, surprised at the intense pressure the governance professional feels as compared with the board, and that the stress is more in the governance professional. And yes, I think that may be true. Um, One of the things that I do, as part of my work, because I do a lot of governance work, but I also do workplace well-being work. And some of the contributors to high levels of stress in the workplace are about workload management, autonomy, uh, and autonomy. So those are two things. Workload management is something that board directors maybe have because they can choose how much they engage. But governance professionals are there kind of turning the handle to support the board. So they don't so workload pressures can be really high. And autonomy, again, board directors have chosen to be there. I mean, governance professionals have too. They've chosen this profession, they've chosen their employer. You can always leave your employer, right? But board directors have more autonomy than governance professionals, and governance professionals in some ways are at the whim of their workload, their stressors are at the whim of what the board is doing or what the organization is going through. So they potentially have less autonomy, which I think probably contributes to increased stress. But again, I think all these are really great questions to explore in next year's survey. So, yep, I'm hearing from somebody the accountability and authority issue does resonate. Yeah, I think that's something we can talk about as a profession. Somebody here is telling us different times of year play a part in the stressor for sure. Times when we're running on fumes, AGM season, right? Year end, uh, and times when you're sailing along. And I think, that is my experience. I am no longer an in-house governance professional. I did that job at an executive level for over a decade, but now I run my own consultancy firm. But I know so well the kind of lumpiness of the board. Like sometimes it can feel like a sort of eternal hamster wheel. You finish one board session, you're kind of getting ready for this, but it does feel lumpy. You have the board meeting, there's a bit of a pause and a breather, and then you start building to the X. So I think that's probably a common experience, but it's different at different times, right? And here's somebody saying, yeah, again, the difference between board and governance professional experience, and this person is saying makes difference, makes sense given the difference in authority, which I think is true. So yeah, so here's an interesting question about turnover on boards. Many boards have indicated difficult, this is what this person is saying, have indicated difficulty in recruiting and keeping new members outside regular networks, especially young people or people who are newer to the work. Yeah, I feel like many would not be so forthcoming about the stressors, just as few are completely honest in exit interviews, given the reputational firms. That's such an interesting point of view. So this survey was anonymous, so I hope that maybe got past some of that. But you're right. I think boards as a whole may not say, I don't have evidence that directors are leaving because of stress. But you're right. Anecdotally, I see that not-for-profits do often find it hard to recruit and retain board members, and maybe don't want to talk about the stresses. As a side note, one of the things that I also talk about is getting more young people on boards, and it's something that I think there are strategies absolutely you can employ that have been very successful. For example, in Payne, BC, where I'm the chair, we did a recruitment drive to get young people, and I would say the key to that is helping people see themselves in the role, because often younger people and also people from marginalized or underrepresented groups just don't see themselves as future board members. So helping people see themselves in the role, helping them understand what they will get out of it, the meaning and purpose and so on, is really helpful. So super happy to come and talk about at any time how you get younger people on your board and how you get people from underrepresented groups, but then how do you support them once they're there? And this is part of the conversation I want to start. Yeah. Um, Yes, and here's somebody else talking about the authority gap and eternal conflict, because the CEO usually can ultimately get rid of the governance professional if they don't like what the governance professional is doing. Yeah. And I've been so lucky in my career to always work with incredibly supportive CEOs who understand the inherent tension in my role, that sometimes, sometimes I'm reporting to the board and they don't get to know what I'm doing, right? But not everybody has that luck for sure. Um, yeah, and here's somebody saying on the accountability and authority issue, very difficult to deliver sometimes, and a lack of feeling of success. Super interesting. One thing I've observed as a governance professional, and I wonder if this resonates with you all as well, is that often success is that something doesn't happen, the issue doesn't blow up, the crisis is averted, right? So that's invisible. So often the thing that you are like running around like a headless chicken to do doesn't get seen by anyone, right? So and so often your role is visible when something has gone wrong, which again is stressful and difficult. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for those points, everybody. I'm sorry we're not able to have like a voice-to-voice discussion, but it's really helpful when people are typing things in. So let's move to like looking at the system. So again, I've got three questions. Would love to have your takes on this. Like, so my take on the data is that this is not a question of individual resilience. This is not, oh boy, governance professionals are not coping very well. It's that there's a structural issue. Um, this is the question I'd love to spend time thinking and talking about. What would it look like if boards and governance teams took well-being seriously as a governance issue, both in terms of the governance of organizations, how are boards ensuring that their organizations are places where people thrive, and in terms of the people working on the governance, how are we making sure that the board directors and the governance professionals are supported and thrive? You know, and how do we close the gap? Somebody here in the question said, somebody said they are a director and they're going to ask their governance professional, how do we close the gap so that directors maybe understand a bit better what governance professionals might be carrying, All right. So I would love to, I'm going to give some moments for people again to type. If people have got thoughts on that, I would love to hear them while I take a pause and a drink. I'll give you all a few moments to think about this one. Would love to hear your takes. Again, as I say, there's 60 of us on this call, so I know there's a lot of opinions and decades of experience here. And I think for me, the most interesting one, and the one that I'm probably going to be spending some time over the next year until the next Pulse survey working on, thinking about, convening conversations on, having discussions about is this one about what would it look like if boards and governance teams took well-being seriously? I think there's a lot of scope for improvement here. Yeah. So I think, yeah, so somebody's saying here, more insight given to directors regarding the role of the governance professional. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think there is still um, a misguided, outdated sense among many directors that the governance professional is a minute taker, somebody who, photocopies board packs or uploads stuff to Aprio or Diligent or whatever you're using. And there's a lack of understanding in the director community of the professionalism and the strategic impact of governance professionals. And I think, both CGI in Canada and worldwide and the governance professionals of Canada are working really hard to change that view. So for sure, anything that we can do to help directors understand the strategic value of the role is something that I think can help. Any other thoughts? And here's another one. An improvement would be to be less service oriented, um, which typically carries more emotional load, and allow for more room for goal oriented work, which drives the organization forward. Yes, absolutely. Governance professionals, I think, so often are forced into kind of a responsive, reactive role because of the crisis-driven, urgent pace. You know, all these organizations being in a time of change, uncertainty, and role of crisis, and this idea that the next big crisis needs to be dealt with. So, uh, this, seeing I often see projects drop because there's too much work on the back end. Getting leadership to submit reports, repeatedly following up, and so on. Yes, and I think this also speaks, the great comment, I think this also speaks to the under-resourced area. 60% of governance professionals report feeling under-resourced. And when you're under-resourced, it's really hard to carve out the time for those forward-looking strategic projects that drive the organization and its governance forward, because you're always on the back foot and responding to the, oh no, we have to call an emergency board meeting, or whatever it is, right? Or, oh, this director has a pet project that now we are being derailed onto, or whatever it might be, right? Um, and yes, to close the gap, there could be some sessions between the chair and the governance team from time to time. Well, I very much hope that all your board chairs are spending time talking to your governance professionals. If you are a board chair and you are not interacting with your governance professionals, I mean, why the hell not, right? And if you're a governance professional, you ought to be able to have time for those honest conversations with the board chair. And just as a side note, I don't like the term chairman, the board chair. You should be having those conversations with the board chair. And also, ideally, and again, this is, not true for everybody, you should be able to say to the board chair and the CEO, the tension on my team, the stress on my team is too much. If we are adding more load, what are we taking off? If we are prioritizing all this, what are we deprioritizing? Right? Because workload management is one of the biggest workplace stressors, right? So thank you for your thoughts on that. Um, Yep, and there's somebody here who, yeah, they serve on the board of various profits and not-profits, and they're also themselves a governance professional, which is the same situation I'm in, and probably a lot of us, right? Probably a lot of us. Yeah, the governance professional's role is more often compared with the executive assistants rather than a governance advisor, strategic advisor. Yeah, this idea, this outdated sense that governance professionals are merely administrators, and that's bad also because administrators do extremely important work for organizations, but governance professionals are strategists, right? They're advisors to the board, they're advisors to management. They are sometimes the invisible conscience of the organization. And they're sometimes like riding two horses at once. So governance professional and they're doing it all invisibly often, right? So yes, so this lack of understanding of the role is I think is part of the stressors. So so I want to spend the rest of our time talking about like what next. So we have some information. And as I say, it's a pulse check. We didn't get to speak to everybody in Canada, and we didn't get to collect all the data that maybe we would have liked to see. And so, next year I want to run it again, and I'd love for you all to be involved. But in terms of individually, what can we do? So if you're a governance professional and you're feeling some of these stresses, so and probably most of us on the call are. So I want to invite some reframes that you can consider to improve your well-being. So a lot of us just barrel through. We say, I need to be more resilient. I need to suck it up. Well, actually, does it help you to reframe it to think, the system in this role is asking a lot, and the support that I'm getting isn't necessarily proportionate to what's being asked, right? It's a structural issue. This doesn't mean that I am personally failing. The next reframe I'd invite you to consider, instead of I should be able to manage it, this is objectively challenging. I am not the only person that is experiencing these challenges, right? Because I think for highly professional people who want to look like they're managing everything, who do not want to drop balls publicly, right? Who are very productive. Um, Often the stresses can turn inwards and people can become very self-critical. Well, I think what this data shows you is that if you are in the sense of feeling like I should be able to manage, I ought to be more resilient, actually, you are not alone, right? This is a systemic issue, and maybe that will help you be less self-critical because self-criticism never helps anything. Um, and then, if you're saying this is part of the job, well, well-being is a governance issue. And this is one of the takeaways I would love for you all to go away with. If you care about effective decision making, and what are boards other than mechanisms for effective decision making, then you ought to care also about the conditions in which decisions are made and the impact those conditions have on the people who are in the room when the decisions are being made, right? So, if you're a governance professional who's experiencing stress, who's experiencing burnout, I would invite you to think about those reframes as you consider what's going on in your life. So I want to turn to some personal actions that each person can take. So here you go. The first one is to name the load, right? One of the things the survey highlighted was this authority accountability gap, right? And a few of you in the comments have said, this is something that I'd like to explore with the chair or the board. Yeah, name it. Name it to the chair, name it to the CEO, name it to the board, right? If it's visible, that's help. If you are being held accountable for things that you cannot get done because you don't have the authority to do them, you know, delivery of reports, but your leadership team will not provide them to you. Like people need to know that. So name the look. I would invite everybody to set one limit this month. So nearly half of governance professionals, 44%, say they struggle to set limits. So maybe pick one thing you've been saying yes to that you're going to say no to, right? What's the one thing that you could say, actually, that's not going to get done this month. I'm going to, or say, if we want that done, I'm going to put that on the agenda for the fall, right? So practice the language in which you can say no or not yet, not now. You say, I'll be able to pick that up when I come back from vacation, right? So I would invite everybody to set one limit this month. So check in on yourself, right? 36% of governance professionals that were in the survey said that their work had a negative impact on their well-being, right? That's not It's a minority, but it's not a small minority. It's a third, more than a third. And if you're in that group, take it seriously. Um, Very happy to talk about the various options you have to support your own mental health and well-being in the workplace. Um, but among them, does your workplace have an employee and family assistance program? There are various different helplines you can call. There are lots of different tools and techniques out there that you can use to support your own well-being. Um, Burnout becomes cumulative, right? You want to address it early so that it doesn't get to the point where you're just like, I am so done with this and I have to take a leave. Okay, so check in on yourself. Be honest with yourself about how you're doing, and find your peers because I think governance professionals and organizations often carry this alone. So this is why organizations like CGIC, like the Governance Professionals of Canada, are really important because you can network and you can share those experiences. So make those conversations happen about how things are happening. Make sure you have a network of peers that you can talk to confidentially, share experiences, share tricks and techniques, because isolation makes everything worse. So there you go. I would invite you to consider these four actions um, for personal actions, and then thinking bigger, thinking about systemic issues. Here are some things that I think collectively we can do to turn the dial. So first of all, make well-being an agenda item on the board, right? If nearly 90% of directors say their board doesn't address stress and burnout among directors, that's a gap. Could you add it to the agenda? It's a question about the conditions for good governance. So it is part of the purview of the board. You know, is the board supporting the people who are in its governance system? Put it on the agenda. Talk to your governance committee chair. Talk to your chair. If you're a director, ask the question. Right? Align authority with accountability. Right? Can you make a push to review role structures and resourcing? In order that that accountability uh, is aligned with the authority, right? So this is a conversation about role design. It's not a conversation about individual performance. Is there something you can do there? Normalize the conversation about well-being, right? So CGIC has a role here, GPC has a role here, the sector bodies all have a role here. Can we do training? Can we create peer networks and professional standards? And can we include well-being in those? Because that sends a powerful signal about what the profession values, right? And I'm coming to, if for those of you that are coming to Church Governance Institute conference, I'm doing a session on this there. I will be, I hope, continuing this conversation throughout the year. We also know within workplaces, normalizing conversation about well-being is a powerful way to reduce stigma around stress and burnout and mental health challenges, and to encourage people to get help sooner. And that's a really big conversation we could have that I also talk within organizations. It's kind of out of scope for today, but maybe we can come back and talk about it later. And finally, use this data. This is our first national pulse check, right? Share the data, reference it in conversations with your board and your CEO and your chair, right? So data gives us permission to start talking about this. So those are all things where I'm planning to continue to work, and I would be really grateful for allies and support as we go on. And I'd love to hear your insights as we go. So my encouragement before you leave this call, I'm going to give us 2 minutes um, of silence. I'd like you each to share in the chat one a response to one of these. One thing you're going to do differently for yourself, one conversation you might have with your board chair, with your CEO, with a peer or a friend or your team, and one systemic ask I'm going to make or support. Right. So only pick one. I mean, if you want to do all three, fantastic. I would love to see more than 50 commitments in the Q&A. I don't think we'll get 50. Let's see if we can get to 10. So I'm going to give a couple of minutes for everybody to write in the chat one thing that they'd like to do after this call. Great one here. Somebody here is going to speak up more when they feel overwhelmed. Fantastic. Yes, because if you are used to being the invisible super professional, people don't necessarily know when you're at breaking point. Um, Here's somebody saying they're going to share the data with their board. Fantastic. And I'll give you, in a couple of slides, I'll give you a link to all the data that you can then download and use. Someone setting boundaries important. Here's somebody saying they're going to give themselves more grace. Absolutely. I love it. Um, yeah, and I 100% agree. It is important to acknowledge that many who are drawn to this work as governance professionals and as board directors are purpose driven, and they tend to put the needs of others above themselves. Um, I'd be happy to share resources. I have a page of resources on my website. I'd be happy to come back and have another conversation about resources, the CGIC, if there's demand for that. Um, yeah. So yes, giving yourself grace is really important. Um, and because we are all humans, we are all imperfect, we are all stumbling through this life together, right? And beating yourself up over your perceived failings, never, like, if it worked, it would have worked by now. So the importance of your internal voice not being a critic, I can't overstate it. So here's somebody else going to set one limit. Fantastic. If you have an idea for that limit, love to hear what it is. Drop it in the point. Somebody else saying support for peers. Yep. And that's what I hope this conversation can start. Um, yeah. Plan out requested board items over a 12-month period. Phenomenal. Good luck with that. And I would love to know how that goes, because that's a challenging one. So that you can manage workload and capacity. I love it. I think that's something that we could all learn for sure. Yep. Establish closer ties with other governance professionals to collaborate on projects and spread the load. Yep, absolutely. And I'm so sorry that the voice isn't on for this chat, because as I said, there's decades, centuries of experience in this room. Probably whatever you're going through, somebody else has been there and done it and gotten through it, right? Um, yeah. Um, Set boundaries in the CEO request to limit discussion with the chair. Yeah, uh, the CEO should absolutely not be saying that the governance professional and the chair can't interface. That's wild. And that's absolutely one of those accountability authority gaps where you can't do your role if the CEO won't let you interact with the chair. And that, to me, speaks to a fundamental misunderstanding by the CEO of what your role actually is, right? So, um, so thank you for those thoughts, everybody. And I'm sure there's more, and hopefully, as you go about your day and your week, you will think of more things, and I would love to hear them from you. So, create a weekly tip sheet to the board. Yeah, rather than, one of the things that I usually did was, rather than sending out emails as they came, so you always feel like you're overloading the board, it's like once a week. Here's the things you need to know this week. That can really help kind of take the temperature, the sort of crisis and urgency uh, temperature down. So as we kind of wind up, I want you to leave with this thought, right? Governance work matters. We're all here, and hopefully there's things that we all love and enjoy about the role and about the work, and it's important, right? Governance professionals and directors are supporting the organizations that build our communities and our economy, right? It's governance work is important, but the people that are doing it are important too, and their well-being and their welfare matters, and we need to start talking about it more. And so, in terms of next steps for all of you, right? If you follow this QR code, it will take you to a page on my website, which includes a whole bunch of data, and it includes downloadable PDFs, one about directors and one about governance professionals. So if you want data that you can share with your boards or your CEO or your peers, that's the place that you can go get it. It's at mcglashan.ca/governance wellbeing, or use the QR code. And also, Kimberly will be sending out the slides afterwards. So if you can't get to it now, you can pick that up later. There's also a place where you can sign up if you want to continue to be part of this conversation. If next year, when we launch the Pulse Check next year, you would be interested in contributing to it, sharing among your networks, I would love that as well. Come find me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn as a whole is terrible for everybody's well-being, including mine. So I try not to spend very much time on it, but do connect with me. I would love to hear from you about what's working from you, what questions you still have, what you want to do, your shared experiences about how we can uplift the people that are doing governance work, right? So So thank you, everybody. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I want to hand over to Kimberly. If there's more questions in the chat, I will take them. Otherwise, thanks for your time and attention, and I would love to connect with you again on this, what I think of as really important work. So thank you.
We do have just a few more thoughts in the Q&A section. Um, if you wanted to take a look at
Oh,
those, Shauna.
yep, yep. So there's somebody here suggesting an accountability peer partner. Brilliant idea. Brilliant idea. And I think those networks of governance professionals can be really helpful. Yeah, thanks. And I think we're sort of wrapping up. So thank you for your time and attention. I want to keep this conversation going, and hopefully you all now know where to find me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shauna. This was quite insightful. So much more information for you guys to see, to share with your boards as well. Um, and this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us today and your perspectives on the realities of governance work as well. We're very grateful for the insight you shared, and this is the end of today's session. The recordings will be available for you through our YouTube. You will have access to that very shortly. And also, there will be a short survey at the end of the session for you to be able to share your thoughts, any more insights you would have on the session. We will be sharing that with Shauna as well. Other than that, thank you so much. It's the end of today's session.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.